Hi everyone, my name is Essen and you are listening to the Brown History Podcast. However, in the 1970s, the oil boom in the Gulf sparked a surge in demand for labor, which was largely filled by Keralites, thus transforming the fabric of Kerala society forever. When we talk about migrant labor, we often focus on the economic side. But we forget that cities are built not just from stone and brick, they are also built on dreams, hopes, memories, and longings, passed down from one generation to the next. On today's episode, we sit with Mohamed Shafeeq Karinkurayil, author of the Gulf Migrant Archives in Kerala, the first ever book that studies Gulf Migrant Archives in Malayalam through photographs, films, and literature. Together, we discuss the impact of the Gulf in Kerala and examine migrant labor beyond just the economic aspects. If you're enjoying the Brown History Podcast, the Brown History feed, and you want to help out, you want to support, do consider being a Patreon. You could also be a subscriber to our newsletter. You could check out our shop. There are so many different ways to show love. Any help, any contribution goes a long, long way. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and let's get this started. Here we go. Thank you so much for being here. I read your book. It was really fascinating and really interesting to see this
Thank you.
perspective. I think before we start getting into the deep questions, maybe we should put some context for the listeners. So, correct me if I'm wrong, it was in the late 1970s when the oil boom happened in the Gulf, and that's when the mass migrations from Kerala to the Gulf began. That for me, that's the before and after event. There's before the oil boom and after the oil boom. So, before the 1970s, before the oil boom, what was Kerala like? What was the situation like over there? Was it I'm trying to find out what was the situation that people had to leave and go to the Gulf. So before that, what was it like? What was the society like? And I think once people started leaving to the Gulf, the society kind of changed and the culture changed and the media changed. So before that event, what was the society like? What was the culture like? What were people doing? Just what was life like before the oil boom in Kerala? And were people still going to different places for work, or maybe not as much, or different countries? I maybe I asked too many questions here.
No, actually, thank you. We are basically looking at a state in South India, which at the time of independence, 1947, was among the poorest of Indian states. It continues to have very little production. It also had a low standard of living, such that in the 60s, there was so much hunger in the 50s and 60s in this South Indian state. But at the same time, there was a politics which is called, which is basically one of welfare that was instituted, which has its historical roots in the princely states, which used to be there in Kerala.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was also a kind of revolutionary fervor. It was a state which had considerable grassroots support for communist movements and had the first elected communist government in Kerala, in India, and the second elected communist government in the whole world. So that is the political context to it. And the communist governments did take a few steps which would help the channeling of migration in a particular way. First of this is that in the 60s, they ended the large land holding properties of these big families of Brahmin landlord families,
Okay.
which basically, except for cash crops, like in the sense that if you have rubber or if you have those spices, then your land could stay intact. But if you had paddy fields or coconut,
Mm-hmm.
your land was cut into parcels, because earlier the idea was that the land stays with the family and not with the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So the parceling up of land actually made land something that one can aspire for. That is one thing. But other thing, but at the same time, there was too much hunger, and in the what happened in India was that during the Second World War, the British had their ration system, which they
Yeah.
had in their empire. It was there in Indian cities. But what the communist government did was to, after the Second World War, it died down in most parts. It was dysfunctional. The communist government instituted this idea of public distribution of food grains, But the kind level of poverty, which has to do with the kind of caste system and the feudal culture which existed in Kerala, which made mobility very difficult within Kerala. So, for a long time, people in Kerala have been migrating for better opportunities. So, in the beginning of the 20th century, these migrations used to happen to Ceylon at that point of time, what we call Sri Lanka today, and from there onwards to the Malaysia, the Southeast Asian regions, especially Malaysia,
But
Penang, Malacca
mhm,
in those days. And for some time, like after that, people also used to migrate to Persia, Iran,
mhm.
but all of these were considerably lower in number than what would happen beginning from 1968, but becoming massive in 1973 and onwards, which is the Gulf migration.
Okay.
Now, what Gulf migration did was that basically it was much more large scale because of the kind of construction boom that happened in the Gulf, but also because the Gulf countries had to turn to other regions in order to look for labor because of the unrest in the Arab countries themselves, which would have generated some kind of political tension. That was one. The other reason is that because the natives the Arabs who used to work in these industries also had organized strikes in the 50s, in the 60s, because of which they had to look for labor force which would not organize themselves. So, like, I mean,
Without a union,
some kind of diversified labor force
right?
from, yeah, from South Asia mostly, but also from other countries of North Africa, even other Arab countries. Now, basically, this marks a revolutionary turn in Kerala's history because it sets the one of the fundamental conditions for how Kerala would transform, which is that rather than following the traditional route of industry, like developing industry as the way to becoming a developing economy, the new model was to develop a workforce rather than industry, a workforce which would serve in labor markets elsewhere. So, an insistence on producing service personnel, which through remittance increased the opportunities that was available in Kerala, for example, educational institutions
Right.
uh, or hospitals. Both of this served as the bedrock for a new kind of economy, a new kind of standard of living. So even now, even though Kerala is one of the poorest in terms of industrial production, it is leading all other states in Kerala, and as they say, it's equivalent to many parts of Europe in terms of conditions of life, like in terms of standard of life. And that is because of this move away from industry towards a service economy, which happened because of migration. Because before that, we have an agrarian society, a society which is mostly dependent on agriculture, and agriculture itself, which mostly operated within the grammar of a feudal economy, which worked earlier, which had these
Hmm.
large land holdings. So
Yeah.
from there, we go into a new kind of society which has nuclear family, which has parceled out lands, because the money does not have to come from the land. It is coming
Wow.
from elsewhere. So this
Yeah.
would be the broad context. Yeah.
Could I say that in one way the Gulf saved Kerala,
It defined Kerala as we know it today,
but not
because the
save?
Kerala,
You
because
don't.
it would have been a very different place had the Gulf not happened.
Okay.
So
Not worst off. I mean, you said that
in
there
many
was
terms, yes,
poverty.
on many parameters, yes, it would
It's
have been much worse. Yes.
okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
one
Yeah,
cannot predict.
you're right. You're right. When the 1970s were here, and this was a time when there was no internet, no YouTube, no social media. I don't think most people had a TV in their household. how was the Gulf marketed to these people? How was it talked about amongst people when it was starting to get people were starting to go there? How was the public discourse about it? And did they know the reality of what it was like to work there?
Thank you for that question, because that is the core of the argument here, which is that like the public discourse on the Gulf has come into being only from the late 90s. So how was Gulf communicated? How did Gulf operate? Like, what was the lure of such a mass migration? Now, we are already at a time in which most of the first migrants do not, I mean, they are not alive anymore. But I've had the opportunity to speak to some of them, and it has to do with what actually men were supposed to do in those 60s when there was so much hunger around.
Mm-hmm.
So many of these migrants, before they migrated to the Gulf, they were already migrants. They were people who used to go to the cities in India, uh, Bombay at that point of time, or Madras at that point of time. Now, it is it is actually on this western coast, especially Bombay, Gujarat region, that people who went there, they come to know of these arrangements that one can make in order to go to the other shore, where supposedly there is a lot of job opportunities. Here, the point is that anything was good. That is the idea, because the
Mm-hmm.
situation was so desperate that the men had to leave homes even in their teenage years in order to fend for themselves. Like, they had to basically take care of their own livelihood, and anything would have been better. But there was a charge. So it was not people who had to leave for the Gulf had to come up with a certain amount of money. It was not free. Like this one person who told me that he had to come up with 300 rupees at that point of time. And this is like the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And 300 rupees is like a huge sum of money at that point of time. For
Sorry,
someone to, yeah,
to come up when you say come up with 300 rupees, you mean
in the sense that,
they had to pay to work in Kerala. There was like a fee that they had to pay, and that fee was really big. So they had to work for that fee to get a job in the Gulf.
no, they had to pay someone. There was, of course, no job contracts, nothing of that sort. They had to pay someone to take them on
Oh.
this barge, on this door to the Gulf. And so it came with a cost. It was not really free. But, I mean, they had to manage it somehow. But at the same time, these were people who did not really have any job, who were not educated, who were mostly school dropouts, and they went to a place which no one has seen before. So it's just rumors. So which is why I thought that one has to study these rumors, because not just because there was a lack of other media, but also it shows you how Gulf worked, how the
Mm-hmm.
idea of Gulf worked in Kerala, even in the 90s, because it has to operate on a level of fascination, on a level of a secret knowledge, even though it is not a secret knowledge at all. In the sense that right from the beginning, right from the 70s, there was a quality of rumor attached to the career options in the Gulf. It was like it was not guaranteed. No one could tell you for sure that you're going to get it. But at the same time, a lot of people seem to know it. A lot of people, it operated as a secret. Of course, these were undocumented routes. And as we know, many of the countries in the present day Gulf did not even exist at that point of time. There was no contract between India and the sheikdoms,
Right.
emirates, which existed there.
Sorry, the government wasn't protecting you.
Yes, and the government did not even know this was happening.
Okay.
So it had that clandestine effect to it. And that effect pervades all the media that we associate with Gulf for a long period, whether it is photograph, whether it is film. So basically, the rumor about the Gulf is not just a quality of the rumors that you associate with the Gulf, but is in fact the paradigm through which Gulf could be experienced at that point of time. So this is one of the core major things which then explains a lot of other things, which is that which then explains the kind of ignorance that one supposes when a novel like Goat Days by Benjamin come out. Because when that novel comes out, everyone is speaking as if this is the first instance in which the world comes to know of the perils of working in the Gulf, of the real conditions, situations of life in the Gulf. But already hundreds of thousands of people have worked in the Gulf by early 2000s. So hundreds of thousands of people from Kerala have experienced that life. They have had communications with their family. Why is it that we feel that it has been a secret? Now, to answer that question, perhaps it's not because no one spoke about it, but the condition, the way in which the Gulf was experienced in Kerala was such that it was secretive, not in its objective way, but in its very rhetoric. It had the quality of a secret. The Gulf
Mm-hmm.
migration had the quality of a secret rather
Mm-hmm.
than it actually being a secret.
So they felt like they had to keep it, they had to continue that secretive culture that's revolves around this migration.
Or no, in the sense that they were not. I mean, if you look at the genres through which Gulf was communicated to the rest of the people back home, through letters, through telephone conversations, through songs, folk songs, through rumors, right? These are genres that we would consider private. That is the issue, in the sense that there was no publicly legible genre in which you can write about migration in the
Right.
way Gulf was felt in Kerala. Because, I mean, the thing, even now, the problem with speaking about migration in a publicly legible form is that it is associated too much with alienation, with nostalgia, with loss of home. It is not associated with fascination, with adventure,
Mm-hmm.
with seeking a new, like in the sense, not seeking a new life, but I mean, it is associated with diaspora primarily, and not with people who keep coming back home and going away and keep coming back home. Because the loss of home is the major theme which is associated with the publicly legible talk about migration. And this was a very different kind of migration. No one was actually going away from home that way. Everyone was coming back. But at the same time, even as you come back, you are someone who has experienced something really different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that difference had to be translated here. And for that, there was no language to speak about. That is the crux of it. Yeah. These people come back, they make huge houses. I mean, people who go to the Gulf and stay 12 people in a room, 10 people in a room, those bunk beds. They come here, they have houses in which there are 3 bedrooms, but only like 4 people to live there. They make huge houses, they make huge statements. But the problem with it is that there is no legible way, there is no realistic way, cause and effect way of speaking about this Gulf migration. In the
Mm-hmm.
sense that who are these people? I mean, he's not a doctor, he's not an engineer. He did not really have any job when he was here. There is that mystical quality to it, in the sense that here is a person who does not really know any job, but but he seemed to be going somewhere and coming back. But look at his house. Look at what his wife is wearing, what his parents, kids are wearing. Look at what he's spending his money on. Everything is different. But there is no realistic cause and effect way of speaking about it. Because of which, now we have to adopt a genre of rumor. In the sense, I will to give you an anecdote, which is that there is this person. This person, he came home with nothing in his hands, but soon he seemed to have this huge house. He, you know, even gets married a second time. All of that happens. The only way the village can speak about it, this is this is an incident. The only way the village can speak about it is that he has found a treasure. Now, what had happened was that this person gets an enormous, in Indian terms, an enormous amount of money as compensation because he was one of the victims. Like, I think he had a shop and it got gutted or something during the first Gulf War between Iraq and Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not the way in which it gets translated. What gets translated, even though a lot of people know this, the lore is of this guy who found a treasure in the Gulf. And similarly, if you look at all these stories, you have all these exaggerated figures, there is this Arab and he loves his new servant so much that, on his deathbed, he gives him a lot of money. And this guy is now this rich businessman. No, these are, of course, exaggerated elements. Like, these are all narrative elements. But there
Yeah.
is a reason why we have this narrative element. That is because there is a lack of translatability between the space of Kerala and the space of Gulf. But there is also a living connection. It's not a diaspora situation in which someone leaves home and then we do not know about them. It's just home is just memory, home is just that person has exited forever. No, this person keeps coming back. But there is no way to speak about the kind of changes that has happened, except as exaggerations, as rumors,
Right.
which do not find its adequate representation in literature, because literature has to speak about alienation, nostalgia, loss of home, all of that. So it takes these other forms.
It's very interesting to see that people live in one region and you see nothing but success, and on the other hand, you see labor somewhere else. But you don't see labor actually; it's invisible. You just see the
Yes.
success, not the labor. It must how does so this is how I guess it affects the collective psyche. What about the man who doesn't leave, who
Hmm.
stays, who works in Kerala and has a job there?
One of the characteristics of this circular migration that we have is that there is no clear binary between a migrant and a non-migrant, in the sense that every non-migrant is a potential migrant.
Wow.
So he has to operate within that, in that temporary status, even at home. I'm temporarily a non-migrant. It is only very rarely that you see some people who have made the decision in life that I will never go to the Gulf, and this is how they will say, I will never go to the Gulf. But otherwise, everyone is a potential migrant. Now, the migrant obviously makes his distinction clear from the non-migrant. But that is only at the visible scale. The migrant has big house, the non-migrant might not have a big house as the migrant. All of that is there. But at the same time, there is also an ongoing discourse about how the non-migrant is actually the more blissful person because he gets to stay at home. While the non-migrant thinks that, if that is the case, why can't this guy just stay home? In the sense, if there is any sincerity to that thought. then that person should just stay home, which means that no, actually there is a secret to it. It
Mm-hmm.
is almost like this person, these migrants are guarding something. Because if things are so bad, and I mean, the other point is that everyone knew that things are bad. At least the migrants did not ever make it a secret that things are very bad in the Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there is also a difficulty in accepting it as it is. Because if that is the case, then why can't they just stay back? Even though, like, things are difficult here, at least, I mean, it is, if you say that it is much better here, then why not just stay? Actually, I mean, there is this story of this Arab guy who came to Kerala. And then, he visited all these places. And at the end of it, he said, you should not come back. I am terminating you from your job because I don't understand. You have mango, you have jackfruit, you
Mm-hmm.
have all this greenery. I don't understand why you have to come there. You stay here. Now, this is, of course, a story which is, of course, perpetuated by the Gulf migrants themselves, because it shows them in a particular light. It shows Arab Gulf in a particular light. But at the same time, why is it that for the non-migrant, it is not easily understandable that someone who left for the Gulf for 2 years continues to be there for 30 years? Of course, there should be something else there, some enjoyment there, which he cannot partake of. So, which is in fact what is fueling this temporary status of non-migrant, because every non-migrant is also someone who is forever ready to migrate if an opportunity arises.
It's 2024 now. Is there a different representation of the Gulf now that's generally prevalent? Is it still hush hush, or are there songs and movies and books now out there that now show Gulf as it is and not as a magical place?
Yes, starting from the 2000s, we have quite a lot of Gulf migrant literature, which shows very harsh conditions in the Gulf. My point being that, but people always knew it. But at the same time, new avenues have opened up, which is in the sense that one of the things about the Gulf is that you can never settle there. It's very, in the sense that one has to come back. It is always a temporary business. And unlike other times, see, one of the things about migration was its opacity, right? I mean, that opacity does not exist anymore. Um, you have this flow of all these WhatsApp, and you have this continuous flow of images. I mean, if you look at the migrants from Kerala to the Gulf, though they are there in the construction, uh, but they are usually not really in the lowest rungs of migrants, in the sense that they are mostly people who are in the service industry, or they are business, small scale business, but they are into business. So they know that life looks nice. It's I mean, it's not as dreary as one can read it in the memoirs of an earlier generation of migrants.
Yeah.
Gulf has become much more a part of daily life for a lot of people in Kerala, because they go there during vacations, which was not possible one generation before. Like, only very few people could take their families into the Gulf, but today a lot more people go there, even if it's just for 2 months or something like that. So it is something that can be experienced by a lot more people. But at the same time, Gulf is not the horizon anymore. Gulf used to be the horizon at one point of time, but now for Kerala as a collective, North America has opened up much more than it used to be, because it used to be like a very limited number of people going there. But
Right.
today people think of going to Australia or going to Canada, like in the sense that migration is not limited by the Gulf anymore, and it is not limited by the kind of, it is not governed by the kind of fascination and opacity that used to be there. So it is in fact like a very different time, because of which we can understand the past time much better.
I think one of the defining things of the Gulf was that you don't get citizenship. There's the denial of citizenship. If I were to compare it to the American dream from back then, at least in the American dream, you were able to live there or become part of America. Here, you are denied citizenship. How does the denial of citizenship affect the migrant culture and the Kerala culture and their visions and dreams?
I would say that it was never really an issue.
Really?
Yeah, in the sense that these migrants, they because in the sense that one way to look at it is that you do not have citizenship, you are not allowed to settle, and therefore you have to go back. But the other way of looking at it is that that is the default, in the sense that citizenship is not even something that is aspired for.
Hmm.
It was not even at the level of aspiration for it to be a determining element. This is like, okay, uh, this is another route of migration, another way away from home where one can earn a living. In terms of citizenship, it was not even available as an aspiration, as a horizon of what one should expect in order for it to be a factor. An important thing to note here is that people often place a lot of emphasis not on citizenship but on security, in the sense that one of the factors that people have in mind is how safe is your possession and your life elsewhere. In the sense that it's not like whether you have a say in the government, but whether you are protected in the system. And is one of the that was one of the attractive features about the Gulf, which is that you do not have to be scared.
Okay.
One does not. There is a minimum level of protection that one can assume. So, in fact, yeah. So that is the idea, which is that I think citizenship, it becomes an important context when we are placing it in against the backdrop of Western Europe or North America.
Yeah.
But those were not the horizons of imagination for the Gulf migrants to begin with, for it to be a problem. Yeah.
So, we were talking about how Kerala was poor and it was a very caste-based society. And obviously now it's not so poor anymore. But how did the Gulf change, or if not change, the caste-based society? Now is there more social mobility, or is it still caste-rooted?
It's a complicated question in the sense that our past does not die so easily. It
Yes.
still lives in many different forms. So caste is still alive, but not in its traditional way. Because in its traditional way, caste is associated with a particular occupation. And this occupation basically means that this is like you are imagining a culture in which is kind of holistic, in which some people do some particular work. So when you have to, how does a caste society work? In the sense that when you have to get a haircut, there's a particular person caste assigned to do it. There is a particular caste assigned to do your kitchen work, things of that sort, right? That is how caste works. And caste works through the denial of the idea of wage. There is no wage labor. There is what you there is an economy which is of debt and gratitude and benevolence, largesse, all of that. Right. Now, when someone migrates, the work that someone does is out of this particular rounded, bounded community. It happens elsewhere.
Yeah.
But thanks to the circular migration, the effect of that migration is felt in this locality. Suddenly, you have a house or you have a car, you have amenities which does not correspond to the kind of work that one is expected to do. Now, this brings a disjuncture. It subverts, it upsets the kind of mobility people had, who can go to school, who can go to which school, which was also important because, um, in fact, Kerala is one of those places where there are community-based schools. So all of this basically changes the kind of caste performance which existed. For example, largesse. No one could show largesse as much as a Gulf migrant when he comes back. So if you look at how the Gulf migrants used to come back at one point of time, not anymore, they used to have huge packets of cigarettes. They used to have things bought for every single person in the family and in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
This is largesse. In performing that largesse, in fact, the Gulf migrant is approximating the role of the landlord of that village because only the landlords could afford that kind of largesse at one point of time. The performance of caste thus becomes disturbed. So caste is there even now. It is, it is mostly from within the caste that one gets married, one marries, one gets, it's still endogamous to a large extent. To a large extent, all our celebrations, all our rituals, they are all caste and family based. So caste still exists in Kerala, but its outward performances changed with the Gulf because the Gulf could afford the universal citizen who wears a particular kind of dress, white and white dress, who can perform certain, modern education, healthcare. I mean, these were the models of how to be a citizen, which is the
Yeah.
unmarked person, which basically means upper caste. And the Gulf migrant could do it much better than anyone else now. He could send his children to the best schools. He could go, get his wife's delivery in a hospital, which was unheard of before the 80s.
Wow.
Before the 80s, how many babies were born in a hospital? Rarely ever, because,
Wow.
it used to be a house business. It was a caste profession. I mean, getting the baby out of the body is a caste profession.
I didn't know
But
that.
all of that changed. So, a Gulf migrant can mimic the modern citizenship, was able to mimic the modern citizenship much better than anyone else. And in mimicking the modern citizenship, he's in fact mimicking the upper caste landlord. This upsets the caste system.
Wow. We talked about the migrant and we talked about the non-migrant, but we did not talk about the woman and the
Mm.
children. What role did the woman play in this quote unquote rumor of the Gulf?
Hmm. Now, first of all, women migrants are few, but they did exist. Um, one kind of migrant would be the wife of an Arab, because Arabs used to marry from Kerala. Uh, the other kind of migrant is the domestic servant. This is like we are looking at a period before we have these, service industry which are women oriented. So there are domestic servants, nurses, and then there are these wives. But the The huge majority of migrants from Kerala are male, and therefore they are people who are engaged in low paying jobs in the Gulf. The reason why they can make an impact back home is because they spend so little money in the Gulf. They pay so little rent because 12 people are living in a room. They hardly do any consumption, which is other than the bare necessities.
Right.
All of it so that they can save all this money to show it else, to basically make it work elsewhere, right? So obviously they could not. Most of them, the large majority of them, could never take their wives or children to the Gulf. So these are left behind wives, left behind children. uh, and then in addition to it, you're looking at a society which is patrilocal. The wife has to stay in the husband's house. She does
Yeah.
not stay in her own house,
Yeah.
which then makes the Gulf, the left behind wife, a target for rumors. One of the interesting facts about Gulf migration is that it consolidated the figure of the idea of a nuclear family, because we are looking at a society in which the rich people practice polygamy. Um, some of them could practice it legal, this legal polygamy. The other people had, concubines, whatever, like mistresses, all of that. We are looking at such a society in which the wife did not have the kind of prime importance in the setup of a family. Two, if you look at the 70s, 80s, the consolidation of the figure of the wife, the figure of the wife as someone, again, who has who is the receiver of secrets. Because if you look at the kind of letter writing which happened in the early Gulf period, there are letters which are addressed to be read publicly, but there are also letters which are to be read in confidence. And then wife becomes one of those nodes of contact, which is actually a new thing. It consolidates the image of the wife and the image of the nuclear family. So a wife is the target of rumor both from the neighborhood, because this is a woman who is not in her place, who is in someone else's house, but her husband is not there,
Yeah.
vulnerable to temptations or other people's designs, but also someone who holds certain secrets about her husband who's elsewhere within the household, and therefore also a target within the household in the patriarchal society, because she holds the key. I mean, she holds the key to a good part of the remittance, for example. I mean, she is almost elevated to the position of the local manager, because I mean, the entire household survives through remittance.
Yeah.
It upsets the patriarchal nature of the society itself, because the wife often has a lot of importance, if not equal, quite competitive to the head of the family, as someone who has a direct relationship with the only breadwinner of
The
the family.
source of income.
Mm. Yeah, the source of income. Yeah, someone who has intimate details about the life elsewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Very
so
interesting.
all of this makes it a very difficult position, actually, envied position, so coveted position, which makes it very difficult. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the things the book I think talks about, and I hope I got this correct, we shouldn't look at this dynamic as two regions, like one Gulf, one Kerala. There's not one region, one border. Instead, you should look at this one big whole thing where everyone is part of. It's like a giant machine, and everyone's plays a part in it, including the migrants. And it just isn't one geographic border, but many borders, and they're not geographic borders. They're like divisions. They're like, there's a migrant who comes and goes, and there's the person who stays at home. There are Muslim
Mm.
migrants and there are non-Muslim migrants. There are women migrants and male migrants. There's and then there's migrants and citizens. And there's division in the Gulf with migrants and citizens and I guess Muslim migrants and non-Muslim migrants, like I said before. So is this a, a more better portrayal of seeing all this?
Yes, in the sense that the kind of borders that operate are not necessarily geographical borders. There are many more linkages between the Gulf and Kerala. These are historical linkages, but also, personal linkages, all of that. But at the same time, if you are looking for borders, you can see borders right in your own locality. So one cannot operate with that idea of diaspora. One has to see these interlinkages, but one also has to see that the fascination with the Gulf is precisely also that there is that level of very secret pleasures and enjoyments that it can afford. This is the idea of border, which is that there is a cognitive kind of bordering which happens along several fronts. Like, I mean, its best example is that migrants usually hardly have a friend from a different language, or even from a different region, even though they are all working in the same place. But at the same time, is it the case that, okay, there are no borders between the migrants? Actually, no. In the sense that this entire migration business is dependent on a lot of people who have to operate between the new migrant and the establishment in the Gulf. In the sense
Mhm.
that every migrant is actually part of the migrant economy and not really an outsider. It's actually one chain in which the problem is, I mean, if you look at the rumors, the problem is, I mean, for example, all these stories in which, the wife runs away with someone else back home.
Yeah.
This is one of the things associated with the left behind wives, right? But what does it show? It just shows this inability to really trust even close people back home, right? It is a different kind of border. It is basically something which problematizes our idea of this binary of migrant and native. Because, but if you look at migrant literature from the Gulf, usually the oppressors, except God days, the oppressors are usually other migrants. And if you look at the Malayalam migrant memoirs from, or novels from the earlier novels, early 2000s, usually they are other people from Kerala. Like, the contractor, the guy who is corrupt, is actually another guy from Kerala. The CID spy is actually from Kerala. Like, there is this idea that you cannot really trust. It's always quite porous. So you cannot really say that, there is a migrant native binary or a migrant non-migrant binary. Every non-migrant is a potential migrant. Every migrant is actually in, you know, in conspiring with the native in order to, how to take advantage of the other migrant. I mean, I think the reason why we have rumors is precisely, or even photography, even film, take the form of rumor, is precisely because we are operating in a borderland where you cannot really trust anyone.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor.
no,
Yeah,
no.
and so
You
nice
did
to speak to you. Yeah.
this is a pleasure. I guess if someone wanted to learn more about the rumor, is there any books or movies you recommend or a song
About the Gulf
about
rumors,
yes, about the
or
Gulf
generally about,
dynamics?
yeah. So my own two references was, one was Veena Das, and the other one was Nadia Sarmatakis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct. Nadia Sarmatakis. Is that how it is
I don't know.
pronounced? Okay, I mean the Greek ethnographer. But my own points of, I mean, these theirs were works that I found fascinating, and in fact, like something which made me think, like what could these rumors mean? Yeah, so I would actually recommend those two. Um, One of the things which caught my attention was that we have a very popular, there is a particular kind of dance among Muslims in Kerala which is holding two sticks. It's called Kolkuli. Within that dance, there's a very famous song, and it comes from the 80s, in which there are these couple of lines. I mean, everything is actually about an old woman in the village,
Okay.
but there's this couple of line in which the song is about this old woman heard about another woman who heard about her son who is in the Gulf and has got trapped in some dicey business there. And hearing this, she lost her consciousness in the tea shop. This is actually these are the two lines. And basically, what I mean, this is one thing, it shows us the quality of rumor, someone hearing something from someone else.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that even in the 80s, it was very clear popularly that Gulf can be quite a big trap. And like, all this other discourse in which people only now come to know
Yeah.
is actually missing the point. Yeah.
What about that? What about this TV show that you mentioned in the book about this? I don't know the name, but it's like a news journalist show where families come on the show and talk about how their family members in who went to Kerala to work are missing, and can you please help find them? Anybody out there listening, please find these people. This show must have a huge impact in the society.
Yes, actually, it's a show which is very difficult to watch
Yeah.
because you have these people calling and crying, and like they are telling harrowing details. What was the last conversation that we had? All of that. It was, yeah, it was really like
It's still is it
one
still
of the
on air?
shows. Oh, no, it was there perhaps for a year or two, early 2000s,
Okay.
2000 and 2001, if I remember correctly. It's not there anymore, but those days, I mean, that is the beginning of today. You have unions, by the way, for the migrant workers in Kerala. There are
Yeah.
different unions. Those were the early kind of like efforts towards it, like this collective kind of organization of Kerala Gulf migrants, so that they can do something there, like help. And today
Right.
it has taken more organized forms. There is
Okay.
also a government wing for that. It's called non-resident Keralites.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
I
Thank you.
will release this hopefully this week or early next week, and